Lesson 9 for November 23 through to 29, Trials, Tribulations and Lists. Monday, November 25, In Their Cities. Question. Scan over the lists in Ezra 2 and Nehemiah 7. What do you notice about them? Well, I've scanned over it and I'll give you a summary because we've read much of this before. Ezra chapter 2. Now, these are the people of the province who came back from the captivity of those who had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away to Babylon, and who returned to Jerusalem and Judah, every one to his own city. Those who came with Zerubbabel, and there's a list of those. The people of Israel, and then there's a list of just so many thousands in various groups there. Then there's the priests in verse 36, and several groups of those are listed. Then in verse 40, the Levites. In verse 41, the singers. In verse 42, the sons of the gatekeepers. In verse 43, the Nethinim. In verse 55, the sons of Solomon's servants. And in verse 59 gives us a bit of a summary. And these were the ones who came up from Tel-Marah, Tel-Harsha, Cherub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not identify their father's house or their genealogy, whether they were of Israel. And then it lists those people who couldn't determine which part of the family they belonged to, and they were excluded from certain positions. In verse 64, the whole assembly together was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 200 men and women singers. Their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, and their donkeys 6,720. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses, when they came to the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem, offered freely for the house of God to erect it in its place. According to their ability, they gave to the treasury for the work 61,000 gold drachmas, 5,000 minas of silver, and 100 priestly garments. So the priests and the Levites, some of the people, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Nethinim dwelt in their cities, and all Israel in their cities. And Nehemiah chapter 4 is almost word for word. It begins with verse 1. Then it was, when the wall was built and I had hung the doors, when the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, that I gave the charge of Jerusalem to my brother Hanani, and Hanani the leader of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many. And I said to them, do not let the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they stand guard, let them shut and bar the doors, and appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, one at his watch station, and another in front of his own house. Now the city was large and spacious, but the people in it were few, and the houses were not rebuilt. Then my God put it into my heart to gather the nobles, the rulers, and the people, that they might be registered by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of those who had come up in the first return, and found written in it, these are the people of the province who came back from captivity. And this is where it becomes almost word for Ezra chapter 2. Of these who had been carried away when Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon had carried away, and who returned to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to his city, those who came with Zerubbabel. The number of the men of the people of Israel, and there's a whole list for each of those. Goes on for text after text after text, listing individuals and their sons. Then verse 39, the priests. Verse 43, the Levites. Verse 44, the singers. Verse 45, the gatekeepers. Verse 46, the Nethinim. Verse 57, the sons of Solomon's servants. And in verse 61, and these were the ones who came up from Tel-Marah, Tel-Harsha, Cherub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not identify their father's house. And there's a whole list of those as well. and once again they were excluded from certain functions in the community. Verse 66. Altogether the whole assembly was 42,360, besides their male and female servants, of whom there were 7,337, and they had 255 men and women singers. Their horses were 736, their mules 245, their camels 435, and donkeys 6,720. And some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the work. The governor gave to the treasury 1,000 gold drachmas, 5 basins, and 530 priestly garments. Some of the heads of the fathers' houses gave to the treasury of the work 20,000 gold drachmas and 2,200 silver minas. And that which the rest of the people gave was 20,000 gold drachmas, 2,000 silver minas, and 67 priestly garments. So the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the Nethinim, and all Israel dwelt in their cities. When the 7th month came, the children of Israel were in their cities. The repetition of Ezra chapter 2, the list of those who returned from the Babylonian captivity with Zerubbabel and Joshua in Nehemiah 7 is deliberate. Again, these lists might seem boring to us, but they reveal an important point, which is that God cares about details that we might not care about. The walls of Jerusalem were now finished, and the biblical text intentionally wants to demonstrate that the Ezra-Nehemiah generation of returnees were all contributing toward this great accomplishment, even though God alone gave them this success. The present generation built on the accomplishments of the previous one, even though the task was complicated, filled with barriers, and not completed as soon as they would have liked. The leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah was valued, but the people also did their work. Each group engaged in different tasks performed at different times, but the result is impressive. The beginning in Ezra 2 is linked with the end in Nehemiah chapter 7, and not only was the second temple built, but also Jerusalem was remodeled and well established. Question. Read Nehemiah chapter 7 verse 73. What does it teach us about how successful they were in their desire to do God's will? So the priests, the Levites, the gatekeepers, the singers, some of the people, the Nethinim, and all Israel dwelt in their cities. When the 7th month came, the children of Israel were in their cities. The children of Israel were in their cities, it says. In many ways, the whole return and rebuilding was amazing. A people who many years before had their city devastated, their temple destroyed, and their land ravaged, had now returned to that same land and that same city and were rebuilding everything, even the temple. It must have seemed miraculous to them and to those around them as well. It was all, however, according to the will and the promises of God. And so to finish the day, what in your life right now might seem hopeless, but nevertheless you are still trusting in the Lord to get through? This week's lesson has been read by Dr. Percy Harrold from Queensland, Australia. It is brought to you by Hope Channel, the Sabbath School Department, and through the services of Christian Services for the Blind. A video of this podcast also occurs on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.